All right, hey guys. Today we're going to talk a little bit about everyone's favorite legal street drug, caffeine. We're going to see potentially its use cases and how we might want to supplement with it. This lecture is brought to you by Keanu Reeves, specifically his role in the movie The Replacements. So thank you, Keanu, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so starting out, we're going to be looking at what caffeine functionally is. So caffeine's a psychoactive substance, and it's going to occur in a few different plant species. And that's how we get it, synthesize it, and put it into other products like the Celsius you're probably drinking right now. It's going to be mostly odorless and soluble in water and has a bitter taste. And this bitter taste is going to be why you see a lot of pre-workouts having like sour or fruity flavors. Blue raspberry jumps to mind being one of my favorites. Um, so caffeine can be really rapidly absorbed, and a majority of this absorption occurs in the small intestine and then the stomach. There is other options where you can place caffeine under the tongue, and that can get absorbed too. And that tends to go a little bit quicker in terms of digestion speed, but we'll talk about that later. Once you ingest caffeine, it can start to enter the bloodstream in as little as minutes because even as you're drinking it or chewing it, you're going to start to get some of that caffeine in the system from the undertongue absorption. So, caffeine primarily acts on the central nervous system, and it functionally is going to be an antagonist to adenosine. Adenosine is a hormone that, when it can react with its receptor, when it gets to bind to its receptor, it's functionally going to make us more tired. It's going to downregulate heart rate, energy, things like that. It's the hormone that you accumulate over the day, and when it binds to receptors, that's what's going to start to make you drowsy over the course of the day until eventually you get so drowsy you fall asleep watching Netflix, playing video games, or if you're responsible, in bed at the same time each night. But that's a different lecture. So, some other potential proposed mechanisms or ways that caffeine might upregulate energy production. So to put a finer point on that, what caffeine does in this instance is it's going to bind to the adenosine receptor. So adenosine isn't actually able to bind to that receptor and fulfill its function. So adenosine wants to get to that receptor, or wants to get to the receptor, and once it does, it makes you drowsy. Caffeine is essentially that kid in musical chairs that gets to that receptor first, and then you're just kind of left there, or adenosine's left there standing, not actually able to make you as drowsy. So some other ways that caffeine might increase alertness or make you less drowsy is it potentially is going to cause myofibrillar calcium to be released. So anytime you're contracting your muscles, calcium is going to be a really big part of that equation. So actin and myosin can actually bind to each other. This is one of the mechanisms that they think is potentially responsible for the increase in strength that some studies show with caffeine. There's a potential influencing of the sodium-potassium pumps as well, which again goes for cellular energy production, essentially. Another way that caffeine potentially alters performance is it has a very strong track record of having a placebo effect. So if you tell someone they're taking in caffeine, they might do better. They might be more alert, strictly from the placebo effect. So to recap, adenosine binds to a receptor, it makes you tired. Caffeine gets in the way and binds to that receptor first, so adenosine is no longer able to make you tired. So some potential benefits of caffeine: potentially small benefits in strength, movement velocity, sprinting, jumping, throwing, and various aerobic and anaerobic sports. Kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive to what we may have heard in most instances, but aerobic sport is actually going to show the most consistent benefits in the literature with caffeine supplementation. So all you runners and endurance athletes out there, stay tuned. It possibly can improve some aspects of in terms of cognition, but it might potentially impair others. The literature is kind of back and forth on this. Some show greater benefits in working memory, some show degradations in working memory, long-term memory, things like that. Caffeine might be helpful in improving performance when you're sleep deprived. I think that's when most of us probably do take in a lot of our caffeine, except for those of you watching that are currently drinking a Celsius. I know there's some of you out there. And there's some potential benefits for high altitude training and or high heat environment training. So that's a little bit of a potential benefit in unique situations. So now we have the long, boring list of cautions. Genetics can drastically change how you respond to caffeine. Some people are going to be high responders, some people are going to be low responders. Some people have more negative side effects, some people have less negative side effects. I think we all have that friend that can take in like 3 Celsius over the course of a day at college and be totally fine. And then we have that other friend that takes in even a cup of coffee and is jittery and wired. Caffeine can have a magnifying effect on anxiety. So if you're already not sleeping well or prone to anxiety, caffeine could make that worse. Habitual intake, and this is going to hurt. A habitual intake of caffeine may attenuate some of the positive effects. So it's kind of the longer you take caffeine and the higher dose that you take for longer, the less of a benefit you're going to get out of it, most likely. Also, there's potentially a linear response, dose response relationship with caffeine intake and increase in magnitude of the side effects. Caffeine strongly affects sleep, even if you don't know it. So small doses of caffeine can negatively affect sleep up to 9 hours prior to you sleeping. So if you take it in 9 hours before you go to bed, even if you get to sleep on time, this is the scary part, even if you get to sleep just fine, your sleep quality is likely worse. And that could create a snowball effect where you're taking in more caffeine or sleeping more. It's just a bad spiral. Large doses of caffeine show negative effects to sleep onset and quality up to 13 hours from ingestion to when you sleep. So that basically means you get to get up, have some caffeine, and you need to stop for the rest of the day if you want to have good sleep. Caffeine can cause tachycardia, so high heart rate. And as we mentioned, the side effects of caffeine are largely dosage dependent. So if you're like microdosing air quotes caffeine, you might not get a lot of the side effects, but if you make a big jump, you might notice that you're starting to get that anxiety, sleep disturbances. And sports that are highly skill dependent might not experience much of a boost. You might get a jump in mental alertness, but at the same time, you might be a little bit jittery. So it might have a neutral to negative effect on performance. An example of this might be golf, as an example. So for some dosing and timing, 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram is generally thought of as the athletic dose for caffeine. So if you're 100 kilograms, anywhere from 300 milligrams up to 600, depending on your tolerance to it, because you can work up a tolerance to it. This is true for sport, aerobic activity, and this is how you likely get the heat protective effect as well. 2 milligrams per kilogram might be the minimal dose, but more research is kind of needed on that to solidify that. And as I mentioned previously, that the higher doses elicit higher instances and magnitudes of the side effects. So if you can get away with that 2 milligram dose, that might be a better option. There's moderate evidence suggesting that the benefits that you get from these smaller doses are very similar to the benefits that you get from higher doses, meaning you kind of can mitigate some of the risk of taking in caffeine if you stick to that lower dosage. And again, if you're habitually intaking the 6 milligrams per kilogram, you probably need to cycle off it and come back with those smaller doses to experience the benefits, but we'll kind of get into that. For timing, 60 minutes pre-workout is a pretty good option. However, if you're doing something like chews or something that could be digestion a different way, it can be a little bit closer to your workout, but caffeine's in your system for such a long time anyways. Really just want to make sure that you're getting the effect in your system before you get going. So kind of concluding on caffeine, minimum effective doses of 2 milligrams per kilogram have very similar very similar effects to higher dosage. But if you're taking those higher doses and you're habituated to it, you're likely going to need to deload to come off that caffeine a little bit, and then you can slowly start reintroducing it. And when you do reintroduce it, you'll probably notice about the same cognitive and performance benefits with much lower side effect. Remember, side effects and incidence and severity likely are linear with dose or almost dose response, though we need more literature on that. The athletic dose of caffeine is around 4 to 6 milligrams per kilogram, and you need to consume it about an hour before training. Skill-reliant sports likely don't get much of the benefit. And the sport that benefits most from it is going to be aerobic performances. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. High doses of caffeine show almost no upside compared to low to moderate doses of caffeine, and they show much less downsides. So if you are one of those people that's worked your way up to a high dose, consider coming off and reintroducing it at a lower dose. This article was mainly referenced from the ISSN positional stance on caffeine. Give that article a little bit of a look. If you want a little bit more info, you can always shoot me a question either in the comments or via email. I'd be happy to help those out for you. The best thing you can do for caffeine intake, again, just to reiterate, use it when needed, use low doses, and try to cycle and try to stay away from high doses unless absolutely necessary, because research shows you're not getting that much more of it and you're getting a lot more of the negative side effects. Have a good one.